Hello and welcome to the Three Will Podcast. This is your host, Danny Ryan. I've got Tommy Ryan here with me. Good morning, Tommy.
Good morning, Danny.
How are you doing?
Doing well.
Great. This is going to be the Deja Vu podcast here because we're going to be talking about something that we talked about last week.
That's right.
Which halfway through the recording, my Mac decided to call it quits, and so therefore we're going to go ahead and recover what we covered since we haven't been able to share that with the world, which is talking about Yammer versus Chatter. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what our background, sort of what through the years, what we've used, and just sort of get into maybe have you reiterate some of the things that you covered last week with that. But just get us started. Sort of when did we start using Yammer? When do we start using Chatter? Just give me some background here.
Yeah, so for us, our introduction to social was Yammer. And it was Yammer before it was acquired by Microsoft.
Reminds me of Groove.
Yes, yeah, we tend to do that. We can predict what is the next piece of software that Microsoft will buy.
We thought it was going to be Slack next, but who knows? Maybe
you never know.
Just don't know.
It's never done until it's done.
Yep.
So when we started with Yammer, and I can't remember the actual date, but it does predate the Microsoft acquisition. We kicked the tires with it, and even before Jive. We got introduced to Jive after that, and Yammer was one of those things that allowed us to do kind of that microblogging, quick communication, more broadcast-based information, and so that was our first taste of what social was.
Nice.
And we found historically in SharePoint, especially in our extranets where we have discussions with our customers, we would get started with those, but they would kind of die off over time.
Okay. And
found that with Yammer, the social aspect of seeing a face, making it easy to contribute, having kind of the alerts kind of mentality that draws you back in. We found that Yammer was a way to get more discussion, open discussion to take place that wasn't taking place before, except in a more physical standpoint of the water cooler talk. This allowed us to have that electronic water cooler talk. And I think last time we were talking a little bit about the discussion threads we had at Extreme Logic where we worked before Threewill, that that's the last time I could remember that type of open dialogue and sharing, and it kind of brought that back to life for us.
Nice. And then so after Yammer, we ended up, I know Jive was a replacement for us for a lot of what we were doing with Yammer. And then I think we ended up switching back after Microsoft's acquisition, being the dutiful Microsoft partner, really trying to understand the product and where they're going with the product, and we sort of switch back to Yammer, correct?
Right.
And then how does Chatter fit into all this?
Well, Chatter is yet another social product. It's within the Salesforce platform that allows that same kind of sharing of information, discussions, and referencing content that's within the context of Salesforce.
Okay.
So that's something that we've seen with sales teams that they get used to Salesforce, and it's that one major tool that they're in, kind of like being in your inbox and Outlook, and then being in Salesforce. Sales teams were using Chatter as that way to do their social, and then Salesforce started expanding that, be more of a single source social platform that you can use across the board. It didn't have to be just the sales team.
How did we run into starting to use Chatter? What's the story there?
Well, for us, Chatter, we really never adopted it as a standard within our organization. It was more of kicking of the tires, and historically, we did some work for Atlassian, and that led to the work that we had at Jive, and we were dogfooding on Jive and trying to understand, what is Jive all about. And then after Jive was the Salesforce integration with Chatter. So our use of Chatter was more looking at Chatter as a way to understand features and functionality so we could surface that chatter feed into the context of SharePoint. And then as time passed, the maturity of chatter, it started getting into things like communities, and we started looking at how can we have communications with our customers in these chatter communities. And that didn't get traction for us because you have to have very few things that you kind of require your customer to kind of log into and participate in. So we used our extranet as that single entry into our communications from a kind of electronic kind of discussion communication tool.
And we got exposed to Salesforce by helping them actually build out their chatter for SharePoint integration.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was sort of our internal reasoning behind really trying to understand what does chatter do. But then we often want to stay away from this, switching to the social network du jour.
Right.
So therefore, sticking with Yammer. I think this is kind of interesting because I think before with our conversation about OneNote versus wikis versus Word, we came to the conclusion that you sort of use what you need to use for the purpose that you have. With this, where we're sort of comparing two products, I really think it's a situation where they overlap so much. It's almost like you want your organization to standardize on one or the other. Maybe. Oh, geez, don't complicate things.
No. So I think there's reality. I think some of these tools end up becoming embedded into kind of your work stream. So you look at a social tool. Really, that line is. I don't think it's as clean as you want it to make it. That this is the only place I do social. So if you look at chatter within Salesforce, there is a chatter feed around an opportunity. Are you going to not use that because you're using Yammer? I don't think so. I think you're going to use chatter for what its functionality is for the type of work you do as an organization. So if you have salespeople that are talking about opportunity, they're not going to go over into Yammer and have that communication. They're going to do it in the context of that opportunity. So that's that struggle, I think, is why we've got into integrations, like the integration with Chatter and Jive and Atlassian with Confluence. I think it's to bring the information to where people are getting the work done. So and so that becomes more than one thing. And so yes, you want to collapse that as much as possible. But I think just the natural kind of course of how our organization gets things done, you start seeing tools creep in, and then you have to decide, okay, where do I draw the line, or what are the best practices of where information goes?
And along those lines of wanting to integrate the two of them together, I know I've talked with Eric Bowden some about what we've done, sort of the latest version of the work that we originally started out doing with Salesforce, and where we're really trying to take that chatter feed and put it anywhere.
That's right.
With us, it would be putting it into where typically for us would be inside of Office 365, because we spend a lot of time in there, spend a lot of time on SharePoint sites. So it sounds like what we're still somewhat taking the use either one for its specific purpose.
Right. In our organization, Yammer is the 90% of what we do.
There's a dominant one typically, I guess, inside of organizations.
I think there is. I think there's that one place. It's like you're not going to have Gmail and then Outlook for your email tool. You're going to pick one or the other, but you might end up having a very secondary tool that comes into play because of the types of groups you have in your organization and what are the tools that they use, because the salespeople are going to use Salesforce, and then you get into what are the developers using? Well, they're using Visual Studio. And then you say, do I use some of the things that are in Visual Studio? Does that make sense? Does that, the collaboration that takes place, you're trying to get it as close as you can to the place that you're getting work done and not having to switch around. And so that's that whole concept of putting chatter anywhere, is to say, if there's enough important conversation that needs to go outside of this group that's normally inside of Salesforce, let's broaden that and let's give the ability to put it where people are getting work done, versus people having to think about, oh, I've got to go over to this chatter thing if I need to go collaborate within my organization. No, I'm in my portal, and that could be, it could be SharePoint. We were doing some work for a large organization that was in Adobe, Adobe Connect.
Experience Manager or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of different names for it, but essentially it's Adobe's platform that they're very big into the branding tools, the creative tools. And so this organization is very important for them for the creative side of things. So they've used the Adobe's portal to do knowledge sharing. So we have surfaced in there that chatter feed and the ability to share into chatter the content that's in that portal.
And this sounds very much like a Microsoft strategy, right? Which is go where the users are.
That's right.
I don't care where, it doesn't matter where, previously there was competition, because I think some people listen to this podcast, when I listen and say, I guess the Salesforce folks listening to this, they want to say, Chatter's so much better than Yammer, and then the Microsoft people want to hear Yammer so much better than Chatter. But really what we're saying is that they can be used for different purposes. Use what works best for your workflow. There's typically inside the organization, one will be more predominant than the other. But I think a feature by feature comparison, really, people they're not really doing that. They're just sort of using it where it makes sense to use it.
Yeah, and on that theme of Microsoft has changed, and that there's no quote competition, more cooperation. I think it's coming from the mindset of the customer in mind.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is a world that the customer is going to be in different places and different, they're going to be in an iPhone and an iPad. Well, you could say, I'm not going to provide an app for that. I'm going to put a lot of friction to not make that feasible for the end user to consume Microsoft services in a Apple device. But no, they have probably one of the better iOS apps, for the Office suite compared to the rest of the app ecosystem.
Oh, Outlook is my favorite app. So
it's even better, I think, than the desktop app. I actually do some of my functions in my phone. I will actually go away from my desktop, go into my phone, and send my calendar availability, because they've got a great, quick way of doing that.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. And so we embrace that as an organization. We are a Microsoft partner, but we realize there's interdependencies with other ecosystems that if you can bring those together in a good way, in a way that is productive and keeps the customer in mind, that's where you can solve the bigger problems. Because you realize it's not just one ecosystem, it is a combination of ecosystems to make it happen.
Great. Anything else you would add to this conversation as somebody who's probably maybe has both products, or just is sort of looking for a comparison of the two products?
I think the challenge you have is that new shiny.
Yeah.
To stick with something as long as possible, and you have to have some really compelling reasons to switch that 80% tool that you use for social. So for example, we're looking at Slack. So our dev teams, there's a few kind of skunk work dev teams that are using Slack and trying to understand what's the value in that. Is there better collaboration? Is there more productivity? Is there better morale in the team using that as a tool for a project-based collaboration tool? Similar to Chatter is that sales context for conversations around sales objects, should there be a Slack component that's for just project teams? And what's interesting is I read an article just recently, and we put it out on Yammer, about Slack and a company called AgileBits that makes 1Password.
Ooh, love it.
And they actually had this article talking about the addiction that they had to Slack. And what ended up happening is everything was going into Slack, and they weren't putting things into their knowledge base, not putting things into certain knowledge repositories. They would just put it out on Slack. And so it kind of fractured their information. So the thing I think you have to realize with social, one of the slippery slopes is you can get lazy and just put everything out onto your social platform and not curate that content and make a conscious decision of this is long-standing knowledge that we need to curate in our organization. So when you're looking at whatever social tool that is, be sure that that is information that is going to only have a value over the next set of hours or days, at most weeks. If you think it's going to have more value than weeks, then all right, where should this go? Where in my knowledge repositories, what SharePoint site, what document library, what OneNote, set of notes do I need to capture this? And then use social to bring awareness to where that knowledge is.
Yep.
So I think that's a challenge for organizations that you're always fight with. So when you're looking at your social platform, try to keep the 80% of your social in one tool. And realize there will be on other tools that are involved as you get larger or as an organization. And then when you put knowledge in there, make sure it's knowledge that is more awareness. And if it's true knowledge, put that in a place that you can curate it over time.
Is Slack a lot like? Does the functionality, is it similar to? Because I've started to use it a little bit, but it's broader than the functionality that you would have in like a Yammer. Is that correct?
Very, very close to a Yammer.
Okay.
I think it is more. It's got a better UI. I think the UI is more addictive. It's within Yammer. I think you do think about what you're going to post a little bit more. Within Yammer, you can't edit something that you posted, so there's a little bit of a pause that you will reread something, because if you post it, you can't edit it. You have to delete it and then go back and create it again. So there's some pause with Yammer. Within Slack, it's really easy. It's almost easier than texting. It has more of a texting feel to me.
Yeah.
And it has some extra capabilities in it that, especially in the area of third-party integrations. So within dev teams, when, let's say, someone checks in code or does a pull request, that type of information, that kind of chatter can be fed into your feed. They call it a channel within Slack. It can be fed into your channel. And so as people are doing things within technical tools, some of those notifications, instead of it coming in as email, it can be fed directly into a channel. And so there's some value there, enough value to say we should standardize on Slack for our projects. The jury's out on that. Right now, Yammer is our standard. I think I see with Yammer, as it relates to content or knowledge in Office 365, if you're putting it in Office 365 and that's your mainstream tool for your portal, for your email, for your productivity tools in the Office suite, Yammer is starting to hook in to that content and hook into the different portals that are available within Office 365. So I think it's very dangerous to go off of Yammer, because all that goodness, all that integration, I don't think you're going to have it at the same level with Slack. Slack is better in terms of a broader set of integrations, But the deep integrations you're going to see over time, and they're being revealed now, are in the Office 365 suite with Yammer.
So probably at our size of company, sort of at a micro level, what we see evolving in general is that we're using Yammer as sort of our standard.
Right.
And then within different departments, say delivery might use Slack for some interdepartment communications, and sales we might use Chatter for some interdepartment communications. But when we want to talk to everybody across the channels, we would use Yammer for that.
Great way to look at it, because someone like a JM in finance, he's not going to go into Slack.
Yep.
But he might do a little bit of Chatter because he's working on opportunities. Someone in delivery, they're not going to be working inside of Chatter because maybe they don't work on sales opportunities. But yes, if we want to communicate to the entire organization, that stream is in Yammer. Interesting.
So I probably wonder if, like, with the larger companies, that probably this is playing out very similarly.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
This is you gave me some pearls today, Tommy.
Good,
I thought it was
good.
coming in saying something different than ending up with something, a different conclusion than what we have ended up, which is awesome. It's great. I like just sort of talking through some of these things. When your head's down using these different tools, you may not have the insight that you get from backing away from it all. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. We did mention earlier in the podcast a product that we're working on called Channel. And what we're doing is trying to take that Chatter feed for people who want to use it sort of in any real platform. Yammer has something similar, which is called Yammer Embed. We're essentially doing like a Chatter embed.
That's right.
For folks who are listening who may be comparing the two and want to combine Chatter with the different sites that people are on, please feel free to come by our website, go through the Contact Us page. It'll come directly to me. This is Danny speaking. And we'll set up some demos of that and show you what we can do with that particular integration. So, thank you for taking the time to do this. I left the socks for last.
I'm amazed that you.
What happened here?
over
Let me
that.
see them. Are they? Well, it's a little. They're light
A little bit more
blue with some
conservative,
stripes. He's going a little conservative on us. But that's okay. It's much more. That's better than my socks. Mine are just sort of plain Jane. So, but keep it up. I expect something a little bit better next week.
Okay,
We're
trying.
Just kidding. Thank you everybody for taking the time to listen, and have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.